hit root.
Hey all, welcome to the History with R&R Roundtable. Welcome to another wonderful discussion panel. As always, I have Mark Gamefully Tired and Jeff Franklin with me.
Hello.
Today we're gonna
Robert.
we're gonna talk about what brought us into history. What caught our eye? What brought us into the wonderful world of historical events and stuff. So I'll go quickly around the table and just everybody can kind of say what they chose. Myself, I have two, but I'll let Jeff go first. Jeff?
Well, I'll tell you, my love with history started with actually science. I was always a science guy, math guy type, and I was struggling to get into history, but what brought me into history was the space race. That ties in with the science and, learning about Sputnik and Explorer, the first satellites, and then the manned missions into space. You have Vostok for the Russians and the Gemini, and then later Apollo. And then you had the space shuttles, and in between that, you had the space stations. You had the Soyuz space station and the Skylab. So that got me into history and on that part. But about the same time, I also was challenged by one of my history teachers. We had to do a project for history class, and something that caught my eye was the American Civil War.
Okay.
And it was more than just about slavery. It was a lot more than that. It was actually about state rights. Yeah. It was actually about state rights, and that got me interested. That caught my interest. So I really started to study that, and that became the center of that project that I had for class. So that's how I got into history.
Okay. And Mark?
Mine kind of parallels Jeff's a little bit as well, but getting into the space race and everything, I was a little bit into history with living in Alabama in the South with the Civil War. But until I saw a little movie called The Right Stuff, that's when it hit me. And I really got interested into knowing more about NASA, the history of NASA, along with what Jeff said, going through, I'm having a brain fart, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, up the Skylab, and into the space shuttle. And I didn't follow up with the Russian side of it as much as Jeff brought up, but it was always there with learning a little bit about Mir, going into the International Space Station, all that. But that really didn't strike me as much. I honored what they did because they were the first to do it, except with the the moon landing. But that's pretty much parallels what Jeff said.
Yeah. And for me, it was grade 5, grade 6, the Titanic. The Titanic in World War II. Well, grade 5, grade 6, those two bugs hit me, and I read every damn book in the library, the school's library. I think I drove that librarian crazy because I made her go to other schools and get me more books because I didn't have YouTube. That didn't exist.
Who did back then?
Yeah.
So a lot of my first introductions to history and rooting out truth from bullshit happened with the Titanic and World War II, but more the Titanic because World War II we had some family lineage and stuff, so that was interesting. But Titanic for those 2 years, I read every book I could find on that boat. It just fascinated the hell out of me. I went through every nook and cranny, went through a whole bunch of things I shouldn't have, like all the conspiracy theories, and really, I went full bore into the Titanic more than I could ever talk about. But it was just the insanity of it, just the absolute insanity. And the more you looked into the conspiracy theory and the more you looked into Allard and his expeditions on it and everything, it was just fascinating to me. And then, of course, that broke off into the sister ships, and then World War II turned into World War I, which turned into a whole bunch of other stuff. And And to this day, those are, I watch almost every war documentary I can find. Some of them are good, and some of them annoy me. But it's just that's where I started, was World War II and Titanic. So I guess now we'll go the other way. So we'll start with Mark, and Mark can go into, I guess, more on, what, how in depth you got, and where it branched off to.
I mean, it was more than a passing fancy. I mean, it still intrigues me today that I watch stuff on Space Network and NASA Network and keep up with it. But like I said, getting to see the right stuff. I think it came out when I was 12 or 13. I can't remember the exact year it came out, but it struck a major chord in me with where everything got started with the test pilots breaking the sound barrier and being chosen, and the other pilots being chosen for Mercury, and then building off that and reading and watching documentaries, old military format documentaries about Gemini, and then watching documentaries about Apollo, and it just going on and on from there. I mean, it's always been something that I've been fascinated with, and just the sheer scope of man going from flying from nothing in what was it? I forget what year the Wright brothers flew, but from that point to 1969 landing on the moon, I mean, totally intrigued me. And
that was a major leap.
I mean, you make a huge leap in comparison to now. What have we done?
Yeah,
I mean, we haven't gone back. Now they're starting to talk about it again, and it's being privatized that companies are starting to do it instead of the government actually doing it, which is good, and I think is bad in a way, because steps can be taken companies need to have a major oversight, because when you start getting privatization, they start cutting corners, and
they
do.
They do.
And that's when things can go really bad. But from that point on, anything about space, from the astronomy side, astronomy side of it, fascinates me as well.
Yeah. And Jeff?
Well, similarly, my interest in history of space expanded into the probes going to the planets and the moon, like the Mariners going to Venus and to Mars. The Mars missions by the Russians, and then you had the Vikings going to Mars as well. A lot of that is going to Mars. And then the outer planets. You have the Pioneers and the Voyagers going to Jupiter, Saturn, and the other outer planets. And it's just expanded from there as well with the mission to Pluto recently, New Horizons. So that's kind of where I've gone with that part of it. And I got interested in other parts of our American history as well, World War II, World War I, not so much the most modern stuff, but especially the wars. I've just gotten more interested in learning about those things as well, and that eventually led to History with R&R. So very glad to be part of this team.
And then for me, like I said, I started Titanic, World War II, and then I branched off from World War II to Canadian military history, because it's not mentioned a lot, because unfortunately we get lumped in as British troops, which is annoying. So sometimes it's funny, because you'll be watching a documentary and they'll say, well, the British were going from here to here, and then you find out it was a Canadian unit. Or vice versa, you find out it was an Australian unit. But in the documentary, they say, well, the British forces. Well, so sometimes we don't get a lot of the credit that we should. And one of the other ones that really fascinated me for a while was Vimy Ridge, because that was where Canada came of age. we kind of stuck our middle finger up at the British and the French because they both failed to take the ridge, and then we did it our
And
way.
you've covered that here
Yes.
on History with R&R.
Yeah. And the Somme. The Somme was a bloody affair for the Canadians, which actually started a whole bunch of resentment between the Canadian military and the British military, which spilled over to Vimy Ridge because the British in the Somme was ridiculous. They just kept doing the same stupid thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and it led to a lot of men dying. And it was just, well, that sucks to be them. Do it again. And I mean, there's only so many times you can send bodies towards a machine gun before you have to rethink things. But so for me, it's always been interesting, and the behind the scenes of it is even more interesting because you find out certain things that doesn't get talked about a lot, and the more you dig into it, the more you find out. And like for instance, Admiral King has two different variations. He has the good Admiral King, which some people revere him and other people don't revere him. And it all depends on what point of the war you look at him and in which job he's doing. He was very anti-British, which you can see that could maybe have a few side effects in the Atlantic War. Just saying. And then of course there's Beatty and on the British side and some other stuff. But that's World War I. Jutland was a mess. But again, it's really interesting because the more you break it down, and the only thing that really frustrates me about history these days is how it's changing, how things are being rewritten and constantly changed to fit a narrative, whatever that narrative may be. I mean, sometimes it's for the better, and then sometimes it's like, nah, you really should have just left it the way it was. And unfortunately, we're moving towards a part in history where, well, if this is the latest document, it must be the true one. And I don't always think that that's the right way to go, but unfortunately, that's the kind of the road we're heading down. So it does scare me a little bit because the more you rewrite stuff and the more you water down stuff, it kind of loses its weight. Also, some things are being pushed to the side where, well, this is uncomfortable, so let's just not talk about it anymore. That can have some major negative effects. I think history is very important. I think history is just as important as mathematics, science, grammar. It's something that everybody needs as a base, because without history, you are bound to repeat it. And I don't think there's a more truer statement than that. And unfortunately, I don't like the fact that a lot of our modern history is being changed because it's uncomfortable.
It's taking a social. It's going to a social studies aspect, is what it's going to.
Yeah,
It's not true history, and you can't. And you have to take the good with the bad when you look at history as well. You can't. Everything can't be a victory. You learn from your failure. You learn from your mistakes, and you move on.
Yep.
And the other thing that a lot of people have to understand is when they're reading a piece of material, never take one piece of material as your gospel. Because what you have to remember with history, and this is one thing I always found very interesting, and when you dive into a topic, it's really cool. You have to look at both sides, even if the other side, like take World War II, for instance. If you only read the stories from the point of view of the Allies, you don't get the full picture. And even though, looking at it from the Axis side of view, well, they were wrong. Well, yes, but sometimes you can understand certain situations better if you get their point of view. Whether their point of view is right or wrong is not what you're going for. You're going for, okay, what was the grand scheme of things? Is as one of my friends, and I think some famous person said it, but one of my friends used to always say, there's three sides to every story. There's my side, your side, and then there's the truth somewhere in the middle. And you find that out so much in history, that is the way it is. There's one side, the other side, and then there's the truth in the middle. And sometimes it's blurred over because, well, some things are just better left unsaid sometimes. Like take NASA, for instance. Not too many people like mentioning that it was von Braun from that really launched the American NASA program. And you could trace the births of the NASA program to the V2 rocket.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't like making that connection, and they like to leave that out now because it's uncomfortable. Good old paperclip.
History isn't always comfortable.
No.
And working in libraries, always double check your sources and get multiple sources. So I'll just echo what you were saying, Robert, about getting multiple sources, get different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other point of view I don't like that has really become popular in the history world right now is a historian has a better handle on what actually happened than the person who was there. That is a major thing being pushed right now, where they're discrediting vets and they're discrediting people who were there, saying, well, they were too caught up in the moment. They don't know the whole story. This is what actually happened. And what they said is partially true, which to me is a bunch of bullshit. But it happens a lot now in the historical world where the word of a vet is being taken less serious than a word of some dude who read a book.
They want to rewrite what happened.
Yeah, because and like I get it sometimes because they're caught in the action, but at the same time I think we can't lose the value of firsthand experience. And unfortunately in this day and age we are, because they're slowly pushing it to where, well, we know better because we have the full scope and they don't. And it's like, you know what? I'd rather talk to somebody who was actually there, boots on the ground, than some idiot who read papers, because papers can be doctored. Even official papers can be doctored, you dumb son of a. So I'm sorry, but that's nice. You have all the stats and all the figures. But the guy who was there and the guy who lived it, probably has more insight into the situation than you do. Just saying. Mark?
Yes.
I saw you on mute, so I thought you wanted to add something. So.
No, I'm just joined the group back. But I agree with what you said. That's the problem with what's happening now. Having actual people there that were physically there for historical events, we're slowly losing them all. The Greatest Generation is dying off, is almost gone, and we will not have that kind of historical story handing down, and we have to rely on what's written in the books and what can be changed. So the handing of stories down is we're losing that. Plus, society today doesn't want to put up with the story of sitting there and listen to somebody tell them a story either.
No. But with that, I'm going to, I hope you all found this little discussion quite entertaining, and I hope it breeds more conversation within all of you. And I'll just give everybody a chance to say one last closing statement, and we'll wrap it up. Starting with Jeff.
Well, I think we're doing that with History with R&R on our live streams, where we're pulling in people that have personal history with events that are of interest. So, that's something we're trying to push here on our own live streams.
Absolutely.
And along
Mark?
with that, you should cherish what you learn. Never forget what you learn. Don't depend on somebody that's from a different generation that didn't experience that to tell you
Yeah.
you otherwise. Always listen to the generation that was there, or at least research, like Jeff said, research it from different points of views to get to put it all together to see how it all fits together.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
And till next time, thank you and good night.